Greetings friends, Dragon here once again. If it is your first time finding the channel, do please consider giving me a subscribe. If you're a fan of Asian cinema, that's pretty much mostly all I cover here. Lots of reviews, lots of unboxings, and subscriptions and comments, likes, all that good stuff really does make a huge difference. So if you like what I do here, do please consider clicking that red button. Okay, getting into the last of the three movies the three films with Sammo Hung box set from Eureka. It's a Region B release, or released in the UK. We're today finally getting on to my favourite of the three, Eastern Condors. I wouldn't say that it's one that I think makes the other two any less great movies, because it's really quite its own different animal, which we'll get into a little bit as we go. I think everyone should experience this at some point, and if you haven't already watched the film, I don't want to spoil it for you, really. It's a very simple storyline, but even still, this is going to be spoiler free for the most part. So it should be pretty safe to watch this, even if you have yet to see the film. But I would heartily recommend that you do, because it's one of Sammo's absolute best. So, checking out to see what the back of the box tells us first. They say Eastern Condors, made in 1987, quite possibly Sammo's best film. This high-kicking tribute to the Dirty Dozen sees 10 convicts offered amnesty if they undertake a deadly mission behind enemy lines in Vietnam to destroy a top-secret munitions dump. Featuring numerous references to Western war movies such as The Deer Hunter and Rambo First Blood Part 2, Eastern Condors is an action masterpiece like no other, filled with incredibly dangerous stunt sequences and full-contact fight scenes that left its cast bloody and bruised. Presented here uncut for the first time ever in the UK and from a brand new 2K restoration, this film is an absolute must-see. Okay, we'll get to the uncut thing in a little minute, because that's not entirely accurate. But the quality of the transfer is amazing. The film looks better than I've ever seen it look before. I had this on VHS back in the day. It's the original theatrical poster on the inside of the box there. And then on the Hong Kong Legends DVD, and in both cases this is a almost night and day improvement in terms of picture quality. It looks absolutely fantastic. And as the back of the box quite rightly tells us, the plot is pretty simple. A group of convicts are enlisted and sent behind enemy lines into Vietnam after America's pulled out of Vietnam, but has left behind a large cache of weapons, and it's their job to try and destroy them so they don't fall into the hands of the Viet Cong. A pretty huge ensemble cast, including Sammo's classmate from the Peking Opera School, Yuen Biao, on fine form here. This is kind of one of the best Yuen Biao standalone performances, although it's not a film that he's leading. I always feel he's best in a supporting role anyway, and he's one of the joys of this movie. And the rest of the cast we won't run through all of, because it's an enormous ensemble of characters. It's a lot of staples that you'll see from other Sammo movies. A lot of faces you'll recognise, some unexpected ones, but really I think this came out kind of in the middle of the golden age of Sammo. So he had a run of 4 years where literally every film he put out for that 4-year period is an absolute belter. They're all completely classic. So 1986 saw Millionaire's Express. This Eastern Condors came out in 87. He did Dragons Forever a year later in 1988, and then followed up with Pedicab Driver in 1989. All four of those, depending on which day you asked me, I might well cite as my favourite Sammo movie. But for the case of today, we're going to dive into Eastern Condors. So it's basically a war movie, which you don't often see coming out of Hong Kong. There are a couple that are borderline war movies, like certainly John Woo's Heroes Shed No Tears, to a certain extent A Better Tomorrow 3 and Bullet in the Head, all have elements that could almost quantify them as kind of war movies, but I would always sort of see them more as melodramas. This feels a lot more like a traditional kind of good fun, enjoyable watch war movie. It's not kind of bogged down in the way of exploring the human condition at times of war, as much as it is of just kind of presenting a scenario and then letting the action unfold, and the action comes thick and fast. The stunt works, as the back of the box quite rightly says, the stunts in this are incredible. The explosion work and the pyrotechnics work's incredible, to the detriment of one poor stuntman who had a large portion of his flesh burned off, but thankfully made a full recovery. And the acrobatics and the hand-to-hand combat are infinitely better than you'll see in any Western war movie. So this is one of my favourite war movies, period. Not just favourite Hong Kong war movies, but favourite war movies from any country, really. It's pretty spectacular. Our main crew, the ones that I'll kind of really mention and kind of highlight, we see Charlie Chin returning, who you'll recognise from the Lucky Stars films. Lam Ching-ying, who we covered a little bit yesterday, so Mr. Vampire himself, is playing Colonel Lam, so he's really the one that's leading the crew behind enemy lines. Yuen Biao's a character they encounter once they actually get into the heart of Vietnam. I was delighted to see Sammo Hung back. He's one of the core group members of Sammo's team, as is Yuen Wo-ping, the choreographer and director in his own right, but here acting and doing a pretty excellent job. He's really funny. His character's called Grandpa, and a lot of the other characters kind of rib him for his age, even though he doesn't seem to be really that much older than the rest of them, to be honest. But anyway, he's called Grandpa. And we have a trio of 3 guerrilla girls led by Sammo's future wife, Joyce Kudensi, the other 2, Chu Man-yan and Ha Che-chun. So they're already, I think they're Cambodian guerrilla fighters who are working with the troops as they come in. It's an American operation, which is pulled at the last minute just as they're parachuting out the plane. This is not a spoiler. This happens within the first kind of few minutes of the movie. But their Colonel Lam Ching-ying refuses to kind of turn back because most of his men have already jumped, so he just goes ahead with the mission regardless. There is a reason why they pulled the mission, which I won't get into here because that's a bit of a spoiler. You can encounter that for yourself. And on the villain side, we have Yuen Wah playing a bit of a proto role for what he would go on to refine in Dragons Forever. He's very twitchy, strange, sort of giggling laugh that he has, and a fan is his main prop in this one, as opposed to the cigar that we'd see him using to great effect in Dragons Forever. But he's got a lot more to do in this one, so there's more action sequences that feature him, and he's a slightly larger presence in this than he is in Dragons Forever. Still a supporting character, but this is one that really broke him out from being more behind the scenes as a stuntman to being an actor in his own right, and it's like still one of his most memorable performances. His crew's filled out by the Japanese actor Yusaki Kurata, who you'll know from Fist of Legend, from God, so many things. Fist of Legend and Heroes of the East, my 2 favourite Yusaki Kurata performances. We also see Dick Wei, who would somehow manage to fit this in at the same time as continuing to do work for Jackie Chan. He was obviously our main villain in the first Project A, and I think it was making this film that stopped Sammo and Yuen Biao being able to appear in Project A Part 2 because they were filming around about the same sort of time. I also see Billy Chow back again, our kickboxing champ that we saw in Dragons Forever. We see Philip Ko, the abbot from 8 Diagram Pole Fighter, and we also see James Tien, who we covered a little bit when we spoke about the Iron Fisted Monk. So James Tien back in quite a small part here, but really entertaining. It's mostly shot in the Philippines and is, like I say, for the most part pretty light-hearted. It's got none of the stuff that bogged down the other 2 movies that we spoke about from this box set. So this is an entirely rapey-free film, which is quite nice to see for Sammo. The female characters in this are kind of better handled than I think maybe any other Sammo movie I've ever seen. They're presented as their own little unit, and they're largely free of any harassment other than from Charlie Chin's character, which they all rebuff in pretty entertaining ways. And there's some consequences, again, that I don't want to spoil, but that's all handled within the little unit or trio of 3 girls themselves, and they're all really fantastic to watch. Joyce Kudensi, I think this was her first acting performance. She'd won the Miss Hong Kong pageant a year earlier, which is also why one of the extras on the disc is a performance that the cast gave at the 1987 Miss Hong Kong pageant. That's because she'd won it a year earlier. So they kind of come back and do a sort of stage-based version of the film. It's not been translated, but you're not missing a huge amount if you miss the subs. There's a few jokes you won't catch, but for the most part, it's just great seeing a huge amount of acrobatics on screen. So I would heartily recommend you to track down. If you've got this disc, watch that special feature. It's really good. We'll get back to the special features a little bit later on. So the film looks incredible. Shot by Arthur Wong, who shot both the Armour of God movies for Jackie, shot my own personal favourite Shaw movie, Dirty Ho, for Lau Kar Lung. There's some kind of really creative little tricks that I've never seen in any other film. Sammo does this incredible thing where he weaponizes a leaf and turns it into a sort of arrow. That's amazing that apparently he picked up from watching the Philippines crew just messing around between shots and managed to integrate it into the film, and it works really well. He kind of uses it as a pretty stealthy technique to take down a few of the enemy troops. Like I said, the pyrotechnic work here is incredible. Some of the explosions are really larger than you feel they probably should be, but it gives the film a kind of bombastic nature that's just really good fun to see. There's one particularly kind of part comedy, part dramatic sequence, which we've somehow seen, or sometimes seen in some of other Sammo's movies, doesn't quite land that well. In this, it really does, with some kids playing Russian roulette, but essentially sacrificing prisoners at a war camp in their game of Russian roulette. That's pretty chilling. It's kind of reference back to the Russian roulette sequence in Deer Hunter, but here I feel it works much better. It's still played part for laughs, but is also pretty chillingly sinister at the same time. But it's one of the kind of the narrative beats that does step into darker territory, but in this absolutely works. It raises the stakes a little bit for our heroes, and is just filmed really beautifully and handled really beautifully. So I think it's an example of Sammo getting it 100% right in tone, and I think the film overall is really stripped down to its bare minimum in this. There's no fat on the film at all, literally not even on Sammo, who lost 30 pounds for the role by eating only chicken and rice for 3 months. So it runs 98 minutes, which it claims is uncut, which I don't know how true that definitely is. That there's apparently a 20-minute longer version of this that I have yet to be able to track down. If anybody knows if it's available on Blu-ray, do let me know. The trailer, which I'll stick in over the top of this as I'm talking, you see some beats of it where there's apparently 20 minutes more spent getting to know the crew. So our Dirty Dozen, before they went out on the mission, they had a basketball game. You see a lot more stuff when they're in confinement at the beginning, when they're still in prison, and got to know their individual characters a bit more. None of that's in this cut. So they're just introduced literally through really a still of each character, a photograph of each character, a few lines of text explaining why they've been incarcerated, and then a very short kind of 1.5 or 2 seconds of live action footage, which kind of freeze frames to introduce each character as we go through, so you see each member of the crew. So I've yet to see the completely longer version of the movie, which would run for 20 minutes longer than this 98-minute cut. There is a shorter cut presented as an extra feature on the disc, which I think, I'm not too sure exactly what it strips down or what it takes away. I've yet to watch the shorter version, because the 98-minute one felt quite the perfect length for me. It rattles by pretty quickly, and it's why this is probably the film, more than the other two, that I migrate to watching or rewatching the most. It's one that I've seen over the years a great number of times, and is absolutely fantastic. Extras wise, 2 commentaries on Condors, one by Arnie Venema and Mike Leader, which I've yet to go through yet, and a fantastic one by Frank Jeng, who I think has done the bulk of the Eureka releases so far, and it's always really listenable. He knows his stuff. I don't want to tell you his credentials. He will explain them to you quite adequately if you go through the commentary track, but he knows his stuff. He's kind of been in the business for a long time. He's really well informed, and he puts together a really informative commentary track. So there wasn't one on the old Hong Kong Legends DVD, so it's really nice kind of hearing an awful lot of the kind of facts and figures behind the film as he runs you through it. The overall box office take for the film was 21 million, which at the time was classed as not being that successful, which is a shame. I think that there's often this sense of people being pigeonholed in Hong Kong, particularly at that era, where the audiences would like to see people doing kind of the same thing again and again. So any attempt to try and do something different didn't always go down that well. And this is one of the instances where war movies in general aren't that commonplace in Hong Kong, and certainly weren't through the 80s and the 90s. So it was not at the time one of Sammo's most successful movies, but it's one that I think you get a sense from the interviews that are on the disc with him that he's really proud of, and rightfully so. It's a pretty spectacular achievement, one that I would heartily recommend. This is, I think, probably going to be the first almost 10 out of 10. I'd say 9.5 out of 10 for this. It's one that's I cannot recommend highly enough. If you like martial arts movies, you'll find an awful lot to enjoy here, even though it's not really a martial arts movie. If you like traditional war movies, if you love Full Metal Jacket and Platoon, you'll also have a good time with this, and you'll feel a lot better about it afterwards. There's none of the weight and the kind of the angst that is often attached to these type of movies here. It's really, although there are certainly some beats that are sad, the film is somehow able to balance all this into really what's all in all just a really good time. So I think the analogy to Rambo in the back of the box is maybe a better one, and particularly Rambo Part 2, where that's a kind of film where you're sort of delighting at watching your hero taking down the bad guys, and that's certainly the case here. So there are definitely consequences along the way, which I'm not going to spoil for you, but none of them stop or prevent this from being really one of the standouts in Sammo's back catalogue. I cannot recommend it highly enough. So this box set is worth getting just for Eastern Condors. The other two movies you can consider a bonus, and if you've watched my 2 reviews of them over the last couple of days, you know that they're both films that I rate really highly as well. So really getting all 3 of these movies together for the price that they're selling the set is a massive bargain. I think it's one of the best releases that Eureka has put out so far in terms of the films, the presentation of the transfers and the extra features. We're going to get into, because the Sammo competition for Spooky Encounters is still running, I'm going to get into the Lucky Stars trilogy over the rest of this week too, because we've still got another week for the competition left to run. So I will speak about those in due course. I'll do a video about each one of them so we can take a little bit of a deep dive. But yeah, Eastern Condors from 1987, absolutely, completely, massively, highly recommended. Watch this film, buy this film, check out this film. If you've seen this film, as I know many of you have, let's discuss it in the comments below. Let me know your favourite beats from the movie. Try not to be too spoiler heavy for those that haven't seen it, but yeah, let me know what you like most, or if there's anything that you disagree with. If you think that it's not one of the better Sammo outings, then do please let me know about that too. But thank you very much for watching. Check back in again tomorrow for another video. Please enter the competition if you haven't already. I think next time round I'm going to have to try and police making sure that people turn on the notifications so I can see who has subscribed and who hasn't. But it's on me, it's a learning curve, so I see an awful lot of people have entered and then unsubscribed, which is a bit of a bummer. But like I say, I didn't say in the entries that people had to stay subscribed until the end of the contest. I just kind of hoped that would go without saying. But anyway, I'm not going to moan about my own ineptitudes at setting a contest. I will just say, if you've not entered, please go and do so, and thank you very much for watching today. Take care.